Moving on to the Pac-12, a lot of people in this city, Dan, obviously really excited about the season. It's the highest preseason ranking for the University of Utah in the history of their program. And you can make an argument that 14 might even be a little bit low as Kyle Whittingham returns 15 starters. And not just like the returning starters thing to me sometimes is fool's gold, because if you suck the year before, you don't want your starters back.
Correct.
15 starters from a team that won the Pac-12 South. So when you analyze Utah, what do you see?
They are the clear team in the South to me, and I really love looking at the combination of quarterback and defense. That to me is just, if we're talking about high-level teams, and we're talking Clemson, Alabama, Georgia, it's the combination of quarterback and defense. All three of those teams can answer that question. And in the South, nobody can answer that question like Utah can, if not the entire conference. So I feel very good about Utah, and you're right, starters makes a difference, and in Utah's case, it's a great thing. I'm curious about the depth. We saw Utah struggle last year at quarterback a little when Tyler Huntley goes down. Even though Shelley looked good, it was a definite drop-off at moments. I have a huge question about what this offense actually looks like, because I am not personally a huge Andy Ludwig fan. If there has been any consistent complaint about Utah offenses over these past few years, it's been their ability downfield to sort of stretch defenses and make them pay for coming up to the line. And Andy Ludwig's offenses are not those offenses. He has looked exactly the same as Utah has in his struggles at Vanderbilt. So that to me is a question. We saw it in the Pac-12 championship game. Utah needs to find a way to get to that next step of just making the field a lot bigger for opponents.
You know, that's interesting, Dan, that you bring that up, because I think most people, and look, I'm 2 miles away from the University of Utah. We're downtown Salt Lake City. I think most people have been applauding the Andy Ludwig move after some inconsistencies with Troy Taylor a year ago. So I want to ask you to elaborate on that. Like, do you not like the fit? I mean, do you not like, historically speaking, like what you've seen from Coach Ludwig? Like, kind of take me a little further into that opinion of yours.
Sure. It's been the complaint, obviously, and I think we're on the same page here, where Utah fans have sort of struggled to fully embrace this offense that they've seen these past few years because of, outside of Darren Carrington, they really haven't had that big threat and an offense built around making defenses pay deep. And so what Andy Ludwig did, and really what he didn't do at Vanderbilt is, and I understand what the position Vanderbilt's in the SEC and the position Utah's in the Pac-12, very different. But he does not put together offenses that are unpredictable. I mean, going back to when he was at Oregon, San Diego State, Cal, he has put together similar looking offenses, which is, they're conservative, it's about efficiency, which is fine, but the way college football has evolved in 2019, as things have spread out, as, the rules have given advantages to offenses, Utah hasn't been able to take advantage of speed, going across the field and down the field in the way that offenses have been evolving too. And so I really would have liked for Kyle Whittingham to go a little bit more creative with the hire. We look at like what Mike Gundy did at Oklahoma State, and he's mining FCS schools and, the Ivy League to find like the next big, young, interesting offensive mind. And for Kyle Whittingham to sort of go backwards to Andy Ludwig, to me is disappointing, because Utah is that really fun offensive mind away from being truly scary. Whereas I think right now they're dangerous, which is good, but I don't think they're evolving the way they should be.
How would you say Utah and Kyle Whittingham on a national stage are thought of now? Because, I've been in this market for a long, long time, and I went to school at the University of Utah. So to watch this evolution from, Mountain West Conference, and then Urban comes in and does some cool things, to Pac-12 invite, and now favored to win the Pac-12. It's just been a crazy arch to watch this program do what it's done. Reputation-wise around the country, what do you think the school is?
I think everybody looks at Utah as a very solid program, and it's a product of both the style of play and Kyle Whittingham's personality that they don't pop on a national level, and there are occasional games where we see Utah beat USC, and everybody has their attention on the Utes those weeks. But when they're on the bigger stages, that's when Utah seems the Holiday Bowl is a disappointment last year. The Pac-12 championship is obviously a disappointment. So I think Utah is seen as having a ceiling of very solid, but not a climbing team. They have like that. They have a ceiling right now that I think nationally people look at as saying, well, they have not broken through that ceiling. And so they're very curious to see if Utah is more than just a threat and is an actual team that sort of follows through on what they look like in October.
The more and more, and by the way, Dan Rubenstein is our guest here on The Drive, host of the Solid Intel podcast, I'll give out the Twitter and social information momentarily. But I wanted to ask you about Oregon, Dan, because the more I learn about them, the more I like them. They come in at 11 in the AP poll. So give me reasons why you like them, and on the other side, if it doesn't work out for them, why would that go down?
Ton of reasons to like the Ducks. I think it starts with, the offensive line and quarterback, really, with Justin Herbert. They may have the best offensive line in the country. They're experienced, they're big, they're nasty. They, look like they want to be a downhill running team, which I have mixed thoughts about as we talk about the evolution of where football is schematically. But Justin Herbert is probably the best quarterback in the conference and one of the best, 5 or 6 in the nation. And defensively, they look to be a lot more unpredictable. They hire away Andy Avalos from Boise State, their new defensive coordinator. Things got a little bit stale with Jim Leavitt and his relationship with Mario Cristobal. So the defense should be very interesting, and I think we'll learn a lot about them in Week 1 against Auburn and Texas. And the reason why it probably won't go as well as some Oregon fans hope, if it goes wrong, it's because of, not exactly what I was talking about with Utah, but the creativity on offense, I think, left a lot to be desired last season, and now they're beat up at receiver, and it was a big issue, and Oregon fans will point to the drops at receiver, dropping key balls in key moments, but really I think it's a talent level thing for Oregon at receiver, and they have an incoming freshman, Micah Pittman, whose older brother's at USC, and he goes down in practice a couple days ago. I'm not sure what the status of that injury is, and it's the creativity and playmakers on the outside for Oregon, which not unlike a Utah problem right now for Oregon, although I think Utah's in a better position than the Ducks in terms of consistency. I think Oregon's ceiling is higher because of Herbert.
Same question, Dan. And by the way, it's the Solid Verbal podcast, so get Dan on Twitter. It's at Dan Rubenstein, and then at Solid Verbal also does some stuff with Sports Illustrated, formerly of Grantland. Dan, same question about Washington. I mean, I feel like Chris Peterson is on the short list of maybe 4 or 5 coaches in the country that has earned the benefit of the doubt. I just assume they're going to be really, really good. And so same question about Washington. If it goes well, why? If it goes south, why?
Yeah, and I think it's benefit of the doubt is the key phrase because everybody points to how many starters they lose on defense. But what Pete Kwiatkowski and Jimmy Lake have done with the Husky defense, they have to earn the benefit of the doubt at this point. They've been so good, especially against teams through the air. Along the lines, they're replacing a couple of key dudes on the defensive line, namely Greg Gaines, but their offensive line should be phenomenal. My big question for Washington is what do they look like offensively? Who are they starting at quarterback? Everybody's sort of penciling in Jacob Eason, but everything that has come out of camp is that Jake Haener is the one, like the if the season were to start today kind of quarterback. And I feel like where their offense was like 2016 has sort of come down a surprising amount when you look at where they finished last season and, namely with that Cal game last year. So the big question to me is, can that offense keep up with the defense? And I really don't know the answer. That's what'll hold them back.
When you look at Ohio State, I mean, look, I like Ryan Day. Everything that I hear about him and I hear from him seems pretty solid. They name Justin Fields as starting quarterback, and he looks the part as well. And I hear some people say, and we touched on it briefly, they might be one of those teams that can crash Bama Clemson. Do you agree with that sentiment, or are there too many question marks and replacing a guy like Urban's just tough to do?
I think they can crash that just because they may have the highest overall talent level in the country just relative to who they're playing on their schedule. And their schedule this year shapes up nicely for Justin Fields, even though Cincinnati should have a really nice defense. They don't really play anybody until the end of September, early October, so they have time to sort of get adjusted. A new defensive coordinator in Greg Madison, Ryan Day is a new head coach. I think assuming that Ohio State is crash-worthy and on that level right now sort of does a disservice to how great Urban Meyer was as a coach there and how great Dwayne Haskins was as a starting quarterback. Justin Fields comes in with the recruiting hype, what he did going into Georgia, and we really didn't learn all that much about him either way in his spot role for the Bulldogs. But the fact that people sort of, pencil in Justin Fields as continuing on where Dwayne Haskins left off, I think is kind of a stretch. I think they'll be very good, but there's just so many questions with Ohio State, if they're going to be that top 2-3 level team.
Last thing, Dan, we'll end on this. And again, thanks for the time on a Monday. BYU Utah, 10 days away. It's a game around here that we all like an awful lot. What do you think nationwide the perception is of this rivalry game?
I think people recognize it as something that is fiercely contested. Obviously, it's been pretty one-sided these past few years. But the fact that BYU has a promising young quarterback now, the fact that, they were able to straighten out, things that had gone pretty wrong a couple of years ago, especially on offense, I think is impressive. But BYU is sort of floating in sort of purgatory because of the independent status. And, they pop up against interesting teams throughout the year. But I think people are generally glad that a rivalry like BYU and Utah exists once again because, we've lost so many interesting, angry rivalries with Mizzou and Kansas. I know Pitt, West Virginia is coming back, Texas A&M. So it's nice that we have a rivalry like BYU Utah that it feels familiar. I'm glad that people love to hate each other in Utah. So I like that it exists. I like that we get it early on. That's really fun as well.
Hey, Dan, thanks so much for the time, man. Great stuff. And coming to town, tacos on me, and we'll go from there, all right?
Done. Let's do it. I'm in.
Okay, thanks, brother. Appreciate that.